Hello, my friend. I'm Nurse Mary, and today I wanted to show you how to do some research. I had a friend recently that has a diagnosis of crepitus in her knees, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this, or if you've suffered from it, or if someone in your family has suffered from it, but she literally had me place my hand on her knee, and when she bent her knee, you could hear the creaking in the joint. And this person is probably in her late 30s, early 40s at the oldest. And so I was really shocked that someone this young would have a diagnosis of crepitus. And then I kind of got to thinking about that diagnosis as I started to do a little homework today. And I realized that it's a simple diagnosis. It's a very broad diagnosis because crepitus is actually the description of a sound. What got me to wondering about it is when we do lung sounds, one of the sounds that we hear in the lungs sometimes is called crepitus. And I'm going to play what crepitus sounds like so that you get an idea what we're talking about. So all crepitus really is a sound. So what that helped me realize is that saying you have crepitus in a joint, it's very common in knees. It's also noted, people have it in their ankles and sometimes in their neck. But it's a crackling of the joint. What is crepitus in the joints as it's described in the joints? And the other reason for doing a video in this fashion is I wanted to show you how I do my research and how you can do your research. And so I'm going to simply show you what websites I have found that are credible and how you kind of have to read between the lines. And again, I'm not making any medical claims. What I really want to do for people is get down to the nuts and bolts of what are they suffering from. So we have a diagnosis of crepitus. We've already figured out that crepitus is more or less a sound. So the ideal in life is to figure out ways to feel less of that discomfort so that you can do more of the things you enjoy doing. So crepitus in the joints is described as a grinding, creaking, cracking, grating, crunching, or popping sound that occurs when you move the joint. The sound is associated with crepitus, which may be muffled or it may be loud enough for other people to hear. And so my friends, I could put my hand on her knee joint, and when she would bend it, I could feel the crackling, which when I started to think about this is very broad. I mean, it could be anything from a bubble in the joint to the joint not having any tissue between the bones to arthritis in the joint. It can be caused from an old injury that never healed properly. It can be caused from repetitive use. And then some people have pain and some people don't. So my friend has pain and it limits what she can do in a day. So how do you get to the bottom of it? So I thought I'd take you on this journey and see what I found out. So we found out what crepitus does. Some people have it in their neck, knees, or their ankles. So what is crepitus? I found that on this Arthritis Health website. Here, this website is a little bit like a advertising minefield. You have to be really careful not to click on something that will send you someplace you didn't really want to go. So it's described as a grinding, cracking, grating. This is where the definition came from for our Google search. And see, it shows that space between the joint we're talking about. So it's muffled and sometimes loud enough for others to hear. You can even have crepitus in your neck. But one of the types of crepitus is a tiny gas bubble that forms in the and collapses within the joint. This type of popping does not typically cause pain. So some people, their crepitus is literally a little bubble between the joints. And I suspect that's more what people have when they pop their joints. You'll hear people popping their finger joints or their neck. You know, even I can do that and I can hear it. I don't know if others can hear it. But what happens is over time, you can get arthritis, either osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis in those joints. So those little air bubbles, what's happening is the tendons and ligaments are snapping over the joint's body structure. This snapping can also sometimes cause pain. So let's see. Sometimes if you have continual use of that joint, you might have a degeneration of the cartilage, or what you might actually have is there's a cartilage over the ends of those joints, and here it shows a joint. But what happens is the synovial fluid that makes it soft between the joints, that will get worn down. And this can happen if you have like an old injury, so you have a poor alignment maybe in that joint. It can happen if you're using repetitive motion of a joint. It looks like it can happen in the shoulders, hips, neck, are the frequent areas affected. Again, such a minefield of ads. Does crepitus need to be treated? That's a good question. And I'm suspecting that some of you that suffer from it have wondered about that. Usually it does not cause concern. In fact, most people's joints crack and pop occasionally, and that is considered normal. But if the crepitus is regular and accompanied by pain, swelling, or other concerning symptoms, it may be an indication of arthritis or another medical condition. So my friend, that was her situation. She had probably developed some other inflammation and pain, even heat in the joints. So the regular medical, so here is what do we know about crepitus in the knees. This talks about the diagnosis, which we've already talked about. This talks about the structure, that crepitus affects the knees. It looks at the structure of the knee joint. The two C-shaped cartilages between the thigh and the shin bone are called meniscus. These enable the bone to glide smoothly against each other. A thin layer of tissue, the synovial membrane covering the joint, produces a small amount of synovial fluid. This helps to lubricate the cartilage. The underside of the kneecap has a lining of cartilage as well, and that cartilage can rub together on the end of the femur bone and the trochlear area. With an abnormal wear, it causes a grinding, which is another type of crepitus. And then they talk about the air bubble and then damage to the joint. Sometimes, however, the damage can cause pain, swelling, serious problems such as injury to the cartilage and the synovial fluid. So what are some of the causes of crepitus? Rigorous exercise, sudden increase in exercise, repetitive movement in a joint. So what are some of the things that you can do to help crepitus? It looks like regular, gradually increasing exercises like physical therapy, supporting the joint. So I would say an elastic knee brace, especially on those days that you know you're going to be doing a lot of walking or walking in rough terrain. What happens when you put something like an elastic brace around that knee is it gives the knee the feeling of support, and what happens then is also the body says, hey, there's something going on, so it sends a little bit more blood supply, so the knee has better blood supply. I've even seen for myself when I've had knee pain, and other people, my mom and some other friends of mine that have had just plain knee pain, by wearing supportive socks. Those are things that can improve the circulation. So what happens is when you get inflammation around a joint, that's decreasing the amount of blood flow. So you're actually causing the body to not be able to repair itself. So you think, well, it just hurts, I'll just go on. But you can actually, it's really important to rest, ice, and anything that you can use that'll decrease that inflammation in the joint. Optimal weight will add to the tension on that joint. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's hard to exercise if you can't use your knees, but if you are carrying too much extra weight, then you're increasing the risk of injuring your knees. So my friend wanted to know if there was natural remedies she could use for her crepitus. So that led me to, does crepitus ever go away? And so I did that search, and again, they're talking about anti-inflammatory medications, braces to support the joint, ice, just managing that swelling, keeping that swelling down and to a minimum. I mean, of course, movement is really important to keep your blood flow going. Can you get rid of crepitus? This was another question that was asked. Your doctor will talk to you about the treatment, including brace splints. Sometimes braces and splints can align the joint. So sometimes the crepitus basically is on a joint that's out of alignment, and that's why it sometimes happens after an injury, a car accident, a sporting accident, or just overuse of a joint. So what does it mean when your knee crackles? And we've kind of covered that. This is really good. Natural remedies for crepitus. And again, the natural remedies are going to come back to supporting that joint, giving that joint a chance to rest, taking inflammatory foods out of your diet. So do another Google search, which I didn't do that here. Maybe we should. Let's do another Google search for, I've already pulled up my article about natural remedies. I'll show you here in a minute. But let's do a Google search. Anti-inflammatory diet. And there is creaky joints and arthritis diet. Because again, crepitus can sometimes lead to arthritis. Anti-inflammatory diet consists of reducing inflammatory response. This diet involves reducing sugars, refined foods, and whole wheat. Nutrient-rich foods. An anti-inflammatory diet also contains increased amounts of antioxidants, which are receptive molecules in food that reduce the number of free radicals. So that means your vegetables, your cruciferous vegetables in particular, those are going to be really good for you. And then avoiding sugar and white flour, desserts, those types of things. Again, this is going to vary from person to person. Some people, they want to remove what they call the nightshades, which are tomatoes and peppers. Paprika, that's the spice that's in the pepper family. But for me personally, those don't bother me. So again, you need to, and potatoes are in that. Potatoes are kind of a double whammy. They're in the nightshade family, and they also have a lot of sugar, natural sugars that can cause inflammation. So some people, potatoes is a big no-no, but to me, it's been removing things that my body, it inflames my body. And so for you, again, you're going to have to figure out what inflames your body. So generally sugar and white flour. Some people, it's even like milk products or that type of thing. So let's go on and talk about the natural remedies. I found this article by Dr. Axe, and it was so complete that I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the bottom to this article. But he talks about what the crepitus is, the grinding, popping, crunching. He talks about when it occurs, what it is, and we've already talked about that. Crepitus of the knee, which is sometimes it has pain. Most often it does. It often leads to rheumatoid arthritis. The ankles, the neck, sometimes, and crepitus of the lung is basically a sound that might be heard in bronchitis, pneumonia, COPD. But anyways, signs and symptoms of crepitus of the knees. Those were the ones that we really wanted to focus on in this particular video. Knee popping with or without pain. Co-occurring symptoms, they include pain while walking or bending the knee, stiffness that improves with stretching or exercise. So stretching and exercise is really good, especially stretching. I feel like is a really good way to move some of those calcifications around and get things moving better. Tendon soreness on the inside of the knee, and periodic swelling of the knee. And then he talks about some of the other crepitus symptoms in the different areas. So who is most at risk? The risk factors and causes of crepitus. So injury, meniscus tear, runner's knee, being overweight, previous injury, family history of arthritis, inactive lifestyle, which we all kind of suffer from these days if we aren't out there actively exercising every day, and inflammation. And again, conventional treatment is the RICE. There it is, rest, ice, compression, and elevation to reduce swelling and inflammation. Anti-inflammatories and steroids sometimes, surgical replacement of the knee if it gets too bad. So what are the simple natural remedies? Boswellia. So again, that's a natural anti-inflammatory. Turmeric, a natural anti-inflammatory. I was going to say in my world, I like to do essential oil mix called Deep Blue that helps relieve the pain and inflammation around that joint, because if you can work through and get rid of some of that inflammation around the joint, you can get better circulation in your joint. Another essential oil that's good, and I like to add it to my Deep Blue, is that some Cyprus Oil. That really helps to break up inflammation around a joint. Sometimes if you notice soreness way above or below your joint, those are signs that you're not getting enough circulation to the joint. So some things like lymphatic brushing can help and just help ease up those lymphatic glands around the joint. And the big one is getting sugar out of your diet. And I say sugar and all processed foods. So your first goal would be to just eat things the way they come from the earth. You're going to want to just eating things the way they come from the earth is the first goal. And after that, if you want to take it a step further, that's great. Again, so many of our issues are from arthritis to autoimmune disorders. They come back to not eating things and not moving enough the way we were created to do. And so it's time to do what we need to do for ourselves. Here's crepitus of the knee, knee popping with or without pain, stiffness. And then there's some information about crepitus of the neck and ankle. So again, this is Dr. Axe's website. 6 natural remedies for crepitus. We're talking about the Boswellia, the turmeric, eating your omega fatty acids. Coconut oil is a really good one to help decrease inflammation. 2 tablespoons of coconut oil a day will do wonderful things for your crepitus. And I'll put a link to that article. Collagen supplementation, that would be good with maybe some bone broth. That's a really good one. One of my favorite collagen products is Dr. Axe's. And I'll try and share some links for those things when I write the article or in the video below. Of course, exercise. One of the things they talked about is helping to strengthening the muscles above the knee will help. Of course, a hot shower and humidity, those are all good things. So, yeah, that is how I do a research on an article. I hope that that's something that's been helpful to you. Again, some of these websites are just a minefield of ads, so you have to be so careful. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful in your day. I'm Nurse Mary with Powerline Health, where we want to help you on your journey to better health.